every once in a while, it's a treat. Lots of times if people come from out of town there.
Dick had the ability to slow down and stop behind the car and stuff. Although I saw it, I said, "Cookie, we're close." I don't know, total stuff, really close.
We'll see how it goes.
We were right on the no,
She's my cousin.
out there.
He's full, he's just full. He's a
That was.
child.
Oh, she did.
Just as much as.
She would bring them over to the house and say, "Bring them over." We finally got our fence built. So.
I was just amazed.
Making myself at home.
Good for a dog, people run.
I'll try not to elbow you down. So.
I think it's.
We welcome all of you here and those who are listening on live stream and wherever along the way that gets passed to. I'm Roger Eberle, a member here at Timbercrest and part of the Seniors for Peace. And we feel this is one of those many dimensions, but we're really delighted to have Mikayla Munn with us this morning. We have to be thankful for a number of women who went to the Wabash County Jail and had a group meeting there with like Bible study and sharing. And that's where we first learned to know about Mikayla. And she was one of the most faithful ones in that group. And then various things along the way. And then my wife, during her time incarceration, that they had a continuing kind of correspondence back and forth. And then after she was freed about a little over a year ago, we had meals with her and we invited her to our church. And then it was like, hey, other people need to hear about her story too. And I think we're delighted to have her here, and may the Spirit of God move among us as we enter into these deep down heart to heart kind of things that Mikayla will touch on as she shares. So Mikayla, we're really glad to have you here and your mom with you too. Thank you for being here. Enjoy.
Good morning. Oh, you guys are wide awake this morning. So my story begins at Wabash. I was a senior at Manchester 8 years ago maybe now. I gave birth to my son alone in my dorm room. And unfortunately, my son did not make it, and I did. At that point, I didn't know who Jesus was. I knew that he existed. I knew that he was real because people in my life knew that he was real. But I didn't know enough about him, if that makes sense. It wasn't because I wasn't exposed. It was because I didn't continue the relationship with Jesus. It wasn't until I was in Wabash County Jail in this lovely, yellow, nasty suicide cell that I got to know who Jesus was. The mic, the handheld.
She's on she has a lapel mic.
Can we turn her
They said, can you turn it up? Oh, okay. Anyway, and I was on the suicide cell for about 3 months. Being 3 months in suicide cell and isolation was the toughest time I've ever had to do. I went from the padded cell to the corner room, which, as you guys can tell, I'm about 6 feet tall, and the corner room is like maybe 3 feet wide. So I had to figure out a way to sleep in that cell. And as I was trying to figure it all out, I cried out to God. And I said, you must be real. All these people in my life knew who you were, knew all your names, knew everything about you. So you have to be who you say you are. And that's the first time in a long time that I felt like somebody wrapped me and let me know that everything was going to be okay. It's the first time that I fell asleep, peaceful sleep, and it's the first time that I had that connection. That relationship was established with God. And that was just only the first part. So then I get sent to prison, wound up at Indiana Women's Facility, which used to be girls' school. And I was dabbling with my Bible. I didn't know what I was doing. I was reading the word, trying to understand it. I read it in the simplest version that I could find. And it just wasn't clicking. Like something wasn't working. So I went to chapel. That's when I met Chaplain Blackburn, Chaplain Lewis, and I started going more often. I started seeing things move and mountains move and people be healed in ways that nothing made sense. And there's only one person, not even a person who do that. It's God. And one of the first verses they read to us was Psalms 37:4. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. I was like, what in the world does that mean? Delight yourself in the Lord. So I have to be happy? That's not what it's saying. God never promised an easy life for any of us. My story is just a tip of the iceberg for what the miracles that he has done. I have seen him heal people with just one touch from somebody else. I have seen him do so many miraculous things. I have seen him transform women who were serial killers into the sweetest women I've ever met. But the reason why I'm here isn't because of my story, which is pretty great, as you can see. I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for God. I tried to commit suicide twice, didn't work. He had a bigger plan and a bigger purpose after my son passed away that I could have never even imagined, never even fathomed. So while I was in prison, going to Bible studies, writing, doing what I could do to basically escape that temporary cell, I quickly learned that the prison that I was in wasn't the one that you could physically see, but it was one that you can't see. I was dealing with depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and a bunch of other things that I hadn't really touched on until I went to prison. At that point, God was talking to me more often. COVID happened, so we couldn't leave ourselves so much, so I spent more time diving into my Bible. And I quickly realized that I had to deal with more interpersonal prison things before I could be released. He made me a promise. He told me, before you turn 30, you will be home, but you have to put in the work. Boy, did I have a lot of work to do. And I'm sure I still have a lot more work to do. I had to deal with my depression. I had to deal with forgiveness. Forgiveness for what I did, forgiveness for what people had done to me, and forgiveness for what people were still doing to me. You can't control how this world works, but you can control how you react to it. People were rude, people were mean, and they are, because they're hurting. So it's easy for us to classify, I'm better than this person because I would never do this. But are we? If you read the Bible, everybody's on the equal level playing field when it comes to sin. No one sins greater, no one sins less. Sin is sin across the board, right? Well, that was really hard to understand. For what I did was awful. What some of these women have done is just terrible. But it doesn't matter. Sin is sin. God forgave all of us. He didn't just send Jesus to die for a select few. He sent it for all of us. He gave the ultimate sacrifice for us. It's kind of like the sheep and the shepherd. So in order for a shepherd to get the sheep across like a water, he grabs a baby lamb and puts it on his shoulder. And that baby lamb is crying for its mom. And so in order for the rest of the flock to follow, he takes that lamb and walks across the water with it. The rest of the flock slowly comes across the water too. And it didn't make any sense to me. Someone told me that, and I was like, what are you talking about? He said, your story, this is my pastor speaking at this point, your story will touch so many more people than what you think. But you have to go through this time to get you prepared for that. What? Why do we speak in riddles? Because I don't understand what these riddles mean. But then I quickly realized that God gives us little things to trust us for the big things to come. And at that point, I was filing for modification. I didn't really know if I was going home. In my mind, I wasn't going home. And then a court date was set, April 21st, my 28th birthday. Now remember, I told you that God said he was going to get me out before I was 30. I'm 28, and I'm like, I'm going to be 28. I'm not going home. This is my mind thinking. Yeah, I'm not going home. Yeah, I'm not ready to go home. At that point, I was doing a computer coding class. It's called The Last Mile. I was almost finished with it, didn't quite complete it. Got modified. Actually went to my modification hearing like 2 days before. And I was like, I'm not going home. There's no way. Wabash never modifies anybody. No, Wabash is not going to send me home. And the last person on the court docket that day, very last one. Now, I can't quote what the judge said because I was crying at that point because I was so relieved, excited, and absolutely terrified. I got to go home. He did. He promised me by your 28th birthday, by your 30th birthday, you will be home. You will be free, physically speaking. Mentally, I had a lot of work to do. My life froze the day that I got arrested, while everybody else here, life continued outside the walls. You guys got new phones. You guys got new tablets, new computers. I had no idea how to do any of that. I remember my mom handed me her phone. She goes, call your sister. And I was like, how do I do that? Like, how do I work it? And she's like, just push your finger here and just dial the numbers. And that's not what I'm used to. And I remember when I came home, I kept asking my mom permission to do things, and my dad. And my mom just got fed up at this point. She said, stop asking me to do stuff. Well, when you're programmed to ask permission to go someplace, or when you're programmed to ask permission for somebody to unlock a door for you, that's what you know. It took me 6 years to figure that out. It's going to take me a lot longer to knock those walls down. That's when another realization came to mind. How many walls do we all build up to keep people at a distance? So they don't know what we've done. They don't look at us different. So as I'm out, Linda Zanako, who's the lovely lady who buried my son, who donated the headstone, who helped put the funeral and everything together, she and I had developed a friendship since I was incarcerated as well. And I asked her, do you want to take my story and use it? Use it for whatever we need so someone else doesn't have to go through this. Someone else's family doesn't have to go through being called a monster, being called all these names that, may have fit at one point, but no longer exist. So we would get on radios and we would do whatever we could to send the message. And then Safe Haven baby boxes came along. And she's been doing great. I believe she just finished her tour in Florida, putting in a couple Safe Haven baby boxes. For those of you who don't know, they go into like the fire stations And if a baby gets put in there, alarm goes off in the fire station, and it's totally anonymous. Then Roe versus Wade got overturned. Imagine how much they need those baby boxes. Imagine how many infants have been left or have died, like mine, because women didn't know there was options. So the reason I tell you this is not to scare you, not to hopefully change your view, but like it says in Psalms 37:4, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. I started talking about my case more openly. And there has been some pluses and some minuses to it. But the reason why I do is because we all feel the same way. We all feel trapped at some point. We've all have suffered from the hiding syndrome is what I put it. I don't know what the technical term is. But basically, we try to keep people at bay so they don't really know who we are. And oftentimes, we do that with Jesus. But the thing is Jesus knows everything you've done. Even the worst chapters in your book and in your life, he knows them. But he also knows the great things that you can do. Oftentimes we get so stuck with what we've done, the dirty laundry, the skeletons in our closet, we get stuck on those. That if we don't leave those, we miss out on the great potentials that he has for us. And I did that. I was suffering, and I didn't tell anybody, but I was suffering really bad when I was pregnant with my son. I didn't talk about it. I was angry. I was drinking. I was doing other things that you weren't supposed to do when you're pregnant. But instead of asking someone for help, I kept it in. I was ashamed. I was scared. I felt gross, dirty. Like no amount of bath or shower could possibly get me clean. But Jesus did. Jesus died on the cross, bled to death, so I could be wiped clean. But until I willingly accepted him, he wasn't going to stop fighting for me. He was going to keep fighting for me. But I had to make that choice. The things that I have learned from prison, not all good, but most of them were. I've learned not to take so many things for granted. That it's okay to not be okay. Because like he said, he will give you the desires of your heart, but you have to trust him. Trust is hard. Because I can't speak for you, but for me, so many people have burned the bridges of trust, and I have burned so many bridges of trust because I'm human. Humans do that. But Jesus and God, they're not human. What they've written in this book has happened. I'm sure most of you guys have studied it way more than I have, so you know that some of the stuff in the Old Testament was predicted for the New Testament, and the New Testament wrote about it, and wow, it happened. And then the New Testament is predicting other things for us, maybe in our lifetime, maybe not, that have yet to happen. God means what he says he means. But don't get stagnant in your relationship with him. Don't be okay with just opening your Bible and that be it. Go to church, have fellowship, find people that are kind of like me. Maybe they're lost, maybe they're broken, but maybe they just need somebody to listen. You can learn, I can't speak for Mim, but I learned a lot from Mim through our little letters and our correspondence. And then I would take, because I would get so excited, and then I would take what she taught me, and then I would have to go teach somebody else. Because I couldn't change my environment, but I could change how I reacted to my environment. And I could start by creating some positivity in this very awful, dismal, gloomy place called prison. But oftentimes that gloomy, dismal place isn't an actual physical prison. It's the one that we all have inside. I don't really have anything else other than that. But I'm open to questions about anything. Are you handling the mic?
And if you have a question.
I wondered if you were placed in charge of the prison system, is there any kind of changes you think should be made? Or,
Oh boy. That's a loaded question. There are a lot of changes. With the idea when they created prison was to basically strip the walls down and hopefully help build them back up into a smarter structure. But the issue is just like every place else. They're short staff. They can't keep their staff. And then not only does the staff have to deal with the prisoners, they have to deal with the higher ups and their attitudes and how they feel. So it's hard. But that's probably one place I would start. And I would also start with the mental health, because there is very little mental health helping. The way that I got through it and the way that I coped with it, because they like to put us on meds because that's just easier to solve the problem. But that doesn't really solve your problem. That just covers up your symptoms. So what I ended up doing was I got involved in church, and that helped me. I started exercising more, and then COVID happened. So then we had to make another adaptation to it. So, but that helped quite often. And then I got a bunkie who was a little rough around the edges for me. She had more mental issues than anything, but she saw me reading my Bible, and she would always ask me to read to her. So then that changed her atmosphere for her. So I told you, God can do miraculous things, and I saw her change. So I know that he is exactly who he says he is. But I would definitely start with mental health, for sure.
So listen to your story. One of the things that kind of popped in my mind was maybe before, or even as you're dealing with it afterwards, what is your understanding of value and worth? Was that something that you were struggling with before? And through this transformation of sources, how much has God given you new value, new worth in your life?
So yes, I did struggle with it. I was very much a people pleaser. I did everything to be, yes, okay, that's awesome, like the praises kind of thing, even if I knew it was wrong or felt like it was wrong. And now that I established a stronger foundation in Christ, I'm okay with saying no. My mom will say I'm a homebody, because I very much am. Like, go out with people, go out with your friends. My friends are doing things that I know is not a good thing for me. They just haven't reached that point for them, and that's fine. Everybody's path is different. Everybody's rock bottom is different. So instead, I'm at home chilling on my couch, watching TV, because that's better for me. Because A, that's freedom for me, because I get to choose to do that. And B, I have learned that I am worth something. And if somebody wants to be a part of my life, then I'm worth their time. And if they want that, they'll send me texts, phone calls, whatever it is, just to make sure that I'm part of their life still. And that's one thing that TLM, by the way, is last mile. That's one thing that we focus on as community, because a lot of us are changing the people and the environment we used to be around. And being around like-minded people has helped tremendously, even if it's virtual.
You're working at something now. Can you describe what it is that your job is?
Oh, now my new job is Girls Who Code. So Girls Who Code is a coding boot camp for girls who are 14 to 17. Yeah, 14 to 17. We start next week with our students. There's 2 advisors per 400 students, and it's offered all over the world. It's a free boot camp for the students, so they can learn anything from cybersecurity to data analytics to, there was another one, deciphering and encrypting and all this other stuff for the students. Yep, all online.
There might even be some of us here. I'm one of the illiterate ones on here, but coding, would you say just a little bit more about what is that for a few of us that maybe don't even know what coding is, but it's, go ahead.
So how many of you use like a smartphone or a tablet, or your grandkids do? It's the stuff that pops up on your screen, that's all coding. Or when you go to the doctors and they're pulling up your medical history, that's all coded. Or when you go to the BMV, that's all coding too.
So it's all over the place. And how they know everything about us before we even do.
Yep.
It takes somebody to know how to put that stuff all together. And so you're teaching in that too. So how many, tell about all those different teachers that are teaching along with you. Is there any differences between them and you and most of those?
So I have a criminal background and most people do not. So what they try to target is they try to target women. Women make up 10%, less than 10% of the technology industry. So they try to target girls when they're younger, especially girls like are 13 to 17 who are trying to figure out where they fit. And they're embracing who they are. We don't want them to change to fit a mold that may not even exist. We want them to be who they are. We want them to learn their self-worth and their self-love and their self-value. We want to promote that. I also still help out with the last mile. The last mile was my step in the door, so to speak, for Girls Who Code. The last mile was a great program that I partake in when I was in prison. And what it does is it teaches incarcerated individuals from all over. So from California, Oklahoma, Massachusetts, Michigan, Indiana, and I'm missing a few, that are inside prison still, how to computer code. Coding doesn't really care about your background, which is great, because for those of you who don't know, finding a job with a criminal background is hard. And that's fine. But certain backgrounds, you can't apply for certain jobs in certain places. So being able to have this and they not so much care about your background is great. These men and women have done some horrendous crimes, but this class gives them a purpose to stay out of trouble, gives them a purpose to go home sooner. And some of their kids are taking it in school, so it gives them a way to connect with their kids as well.
And she's not tooting her horn enough yet, so I'm not going to let her go. Because of those that are teaching now in that framework in the prisons and all, and you didn't tell about that first time you went back into the prison.
Oh, yeah.
To tell that. So you got a couple other cards up your sleeve you should tell them about, the percentages of how many. Go ahead.
So I was, 5 months out, wasn't I? You think? I think I was 5 months. 5 months out, which is unheard of, and I got to go back to IWP. That is unheard of. Unheard of. So I walked in through the front door, not the back door, with black box and change, which was really weird to me. And I walked up and I gave the lady my driver's license. And this lady was one of the ladies that stripped me out when I was going to county. And she looked at my license and she looked at the paperwork. She looked at my license, looked at me, looked at the paperwork. And she kept doing it for like 5 minutes. And I said, "Are you going to let me in or not?" She goes, "You just left. Why the heck do you want to come back?" And I got to walk through the front door, and I walk through the door and I see all these women that I used to be incarcerated with, and their faces just lit up. Like, "How are you? What's new?" Can't touch them, but "What's going on? How are you? Can I have your shoes?" "No, you can't have my shoes." And then when we walked to the yard, so the yard is where people would go to rec or go to make movements or go to chow hall or all that stuff. And the chow hall is right by the front for us. And we were walking to education, which is to the left, which is where the class was. And all you hear is my name screamed across that yard. And all the officers turned around, everybody turned, and they were so excited to see someone making a positive difference that's not returning in khakis and maroon shirts, but that's coming back to volunteer and take their time. When I went into the classroom and I was like, I used to sit here. This used to be my chair. I used to sit right here, and then I used to zone out and look outside and not do my work like I was supposed to. But it was surreal for us, for me, because I know that my testimony is powerful for them, because somebody was once in their spot, can come out here and make a huge difference. And so that's my driving force. To prove, not to prove, but to actually make a way for them, because a lot of them don't have a way. They don't have the support they need. They don't have somebody to come home to, because the people that they grew up with are the ones that got them in that lifestyle, and they're trying to change their lives. So my goal, hopefully they'll let me go back soon. My goal is to continue building upon that and to continue to go back, not only for the women, but for the men. I haven't been to a men's facility yet. I've only been to the Rockville and Indiana Women's Prison. But even if I was just a volunteer, they would get excited. We had outside Christian groups would come in for chapel. Man, that was fun. Like, we weren't in prison for like an hour because we felt like we were in real service. We would have God Behind Bars would come in, and they would set up this huge screen, and they would have all their volunteers come in, and we were in service for like an hour and a half on a Sunday night, and it didn't feel like we were in prison. So when you do things like that, it may be small to you, but it's big to the people who get it, because we're not used to kindness. We're not used to people saying they'll do something and then actually doing it. We're used to the false hopes. Oh, I promise I'll talk to you. Oh, I promise I'll contact you when I get home. Yeah, that doesn't happen all the time. But when you take the time, like I said, if they are important to you, you'll take the time to do something. When people took the time out of their day to come see us, it was wonderful. Like, it made us feel like we weren't in prison for a while. So
It's getting closer to the time, and you can see how Mikayla has been leading in a number of ways, but she's a pioneer in a one little way that she didn't even mention yet. Of those other instructors, how many of them are women?
for TLM or for,
Well, you know, some of that, you told me that one story about all those other.
for the last mile, right now there are no women remote instructors. So the remote instructors will get on the screen and teach for an hour throughout the week for different classes. The max they can do a day is 3 classes, and there are no remote instructors that are women currently.
So aren't we glad that Mikayla came today? Oh, we got another, I didn't know how close we had to wait to the hour.
We have another 20 minutes.
Oh, wow. Hallelujah.
You had to tell them that, didn't you?
Oh, good. You started out talking about the day that you got arrested, and then went on and told about prison, and it's been so interesting. But I'm really curious about your life before that. I mean, obviously, you must have been a pretty good girl, and how it must have felt for you when you actually got, I mean, did you ever think as you were growing up, I might someday be a prisoner?
No.
And so all of a sudden you are. I mean, how did that change? I mean, it must have been such a weird thing to get used to yourself as a person who is a prisoner. And I guess I'm just curious how you grew up and what that was like for you, and maybe for your mom too. Yeah. And she must have a view of you as growing up also.
I would like to say I was a pretty good kid. I mean, I had a couple rough patches, but I feel like every kid has rough patches. Yes, I was an RA at that time too. I played volleyball for Manchester, so I played, oh my gosh, I played for a decade of volleyball. Oh my. I like to say that I was like the one that had it all together. I was the one that when my friends were in trouble, I was the call they would make. I still am, which is great. But at that time, I was the one who was struggling, and I didn't know who I could call. And it's not to say that I couldn't call my parents. I had a close relationship with them, but that's where the shame and the guilt came in. Like, I was so embarrassed. And again, I felt so dirty and so like lost and confused. And I know that it was hard on my parents. All of it was, not only for my parents, but my sister and my grandparents too, because we're all pretty close. But they did their absolute best they could. They would always make sure I had money to call them. They always made sure that I was taken care of, even in prison, which is very hard to do. They would come visit. Like, I was blessed for sure. And I knew that. And my mom would always tell me, like, when she would get me like Christmas boxes or any other boxes that she would buy me and they could send in, she would tell me, and she didn't have to, but she would tell me, because she's my mother, make sure you share. I said, the only person I don't share with is my own sister, but I'll share with everybody else. And she would buy like pre-packaged candies, like, so that way it was still wrapped and I could pass them out to somebody. One year for Christmas, I gave everybody in my unit Jolly Ranchers. And I've never seen so many people so excited for Jolly Ranchers in my entire life. But that, again, that's what kindness does. Kindness can change your environment. I may not be able to change the whole prison. That was not my gun-ho plan, but I wanted to make it a little bit easier, because time's hard. Time's hard when you don't have family, when you don't have money. In the prison that I was at, you had to pay, you did, to wash and dry your own clothes. And so the bunkie that I had, she didn't have any money. She doesn't have any family. So how do you pay for her to wash and dry her clothes? She can't hold a job. She was on medical leave, and that's like, what, $15 a month? It's $5 for you to buy a laundry card, and then whatever you want to put on after that is up to you. You can only get one laundry card that you're there. If you lose it, you're out of luck. And that was hard. So all of us tried to chip in, and we would help her the best that we knew how. And then, like, you guys everybody out here got stimulus, so did we, because of COVID. And boy, we had to help her manage her money, because that's all the money she has to last her. At the last count, I know it was 20 years. And it was hard. And so I tried to I don't want to say go back to being a good kid, but I tried to be the best that I could be. Did I mess up? Yep, sure did. Did I break rules? Sure did. Sharing with another prisoner is breaking a rule. Passing anything, passing coffee, passing like a sticky note to another prisoner is considered trafficking. Yeah. So yeah, I broke rules. We all did, whether we knew it or not. But the guards, for the most part, if you treated them nicely, they were nice to you. Of course, there are some that weren't. And you learned which guard you could get away with stuff with. You learned more things than I was ever exposed to as a kid. I lived a very sheltered life, and I didn't realize it until I went to prison, how sheltered I did live. But you learn how to adapt to your surroundings. And then you learn who you fit in better with and who you don't. And I, if you haven't noticed, tend to fit better with people that are older than me. Because the young ones were busy doing other things that could get me in trouble, and I wanted to go home. And I also couldn't go to a lot of time cuts. I had my college education, almost my college education, correct that. I had my GED, so I didn't have a whole lot of time cuts. And plus, my time wasn't as long. So I went into the kitchen, and that was my first time cut. And anybody who has ever worked in the kitchen in prison knows that is not the best job to work with. You're literally working 12 cents a day for pay. And you only work, the first time I worked in there, I only worked 3 hours my first day because I had the morning shift. And so when I went to take basically an internship is what it was for the kitchen, I got moved up to 25 cents a day. That's the highest paying job that we had in prison. So imagine if that 25 cents was a big deal for me. Imagine when I came out here and I got my first job and I got my first real paycheck and it was like $500 and I was so excited. And it was minimum wage, which was $15. $15 to my 25 cents. Yeah, I'm going to be excited about my $15 paycheck. But it made me appreciate things a lot more. I worked really hard in that kitchen, and I worked really hard when I went to the last mile. I learned how to code with my pen and paper. I didn't have a computer at that point. When we started the last mile, we had COVID. So our instructor thought it would be fun to bring these like big, huge packets to all of our units. And I'm reading it and I'm like, I don't even know what this says. What does this mean? And he goes, try it, just try it and then trust the process. And then when you come in here, we'll test it out on your computer. I think the lady next to me didn't even know how to turn her computer on. So we had to start from scratch. But that made me appreciate things a lot more. So I kind of went multiple different ways with that. But I was sheltered. I got exposed to things. But I appreciate how I grew up. My parents were did the best they could with me. And I made one bad decision and it changed everything. Do I regret that? Yes. I miss my son. And his father misses him, and my parents miss him, and everybody in my life misses him. But in retrospect, I wouldn't have as strong of a relationship with God as I do now if I hadn't lost my son. And I'm not saying that he could have reached me out some other way. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that.
Any other questions? You can see how she's willing to dive in to share pretty nitty-gritty things.
I would like you to tell them what your last act of kindness was when you left Wabash to go to probation.
Can I start with prison first and then do it? Okay. So I was down for quite some time, so I had a lot of stuff. I like bowls and shampoo, conditioner, all this stuff. I call it stuff. And you had to put it in like these little itty bitty lockers, like you had in middle school, and a tote. And they told me I was packing out to go to Wabash. And I was like, man, I can't pack all this stuff. What am I going to do with all this stuff? So I started giving it away. I gave it to people who needed it. I made sure my old bunkie that didn't have the laundry cart, didn't have a job, I made sure she had stuff because she was going to be down for quite some time. I gave everything, almost everything, but like 3 boxes. 3 boxes and a prison mat because I had to take my prison mat home, which I was not very happy about that. So when I got to Wabash, they had to bring me back to the jail to book me out. And my last act of kindness, as my mother so graciously put it, was I gave the bra that I had on, the socks that I had on, the ponytail that held up my hair, and the shirt that I had to the woman who was going back to prison who had nothing. So I come out with no socks on, and Mom goes, "What did you do with your socks?" I said, "I gave it to her. She has nothing." So I had my shoes on with no socks, and I may have gotten some blisters, but it was worth it to me.
I have a question about how your sister and your parents coped. Did they have any support from any social services? Or were they totally on their own with the way life had always been, and all of a sudden they were the parents of someone in prison?
Do you want to answer that? Because you know that better than I do.
We had no outside support, but we come from a family of social workers. Grandpa was a social worker, grandma was a social worker. My husband graduated with a social work degree. His sister has a social work degree. Mostly, to be honest with you, we hid. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to deal with anybody. One day, soon after she was arrested, a local news channel came and knocked on my door, and I just freaked because, you know, my home is supposed to be my haven. And they crossed the line and knocked on my door, and I just felt like I needed to hide from the world because we had no idea Mikayla was pregnant and had a baby and lost it until we were called one morning, the morning that she gave birth in the bathtub. We didn't know. So, but Dave and I, my husband and I, discussed it and said that we can certainly understand where couples that don't see things the same way, like in this circumstance, would have very difficult and face more than likely divorce if they didn't believe in the same way and see things the same way. You know, you always try to believe that you're capable of unconditional love, and we were able to prove that through this instance with Mikayla. We've never stopped supporting her. We don't understand it even to this day, but it is what it is, and the only thing we can do is move forward. But our family's very close. And we have a lot of support for each other. And Mikayla works real hard. She helps us out a lot at home. She's currently living with us until she gets a full-time job. We never see her. She comes down for dinner, and we have family dinner almost every night. And then we talk about the day, and then she goes up again and to her room in her office and works. But she's more than welcome to stay with us for as long as she needs to. And you know, we're glad to have the help around the house.
And that is something that a lot of prisoners don't have.
Right,
Nope.
right.
Anything else, anybody? You're pointing to somebody.
Right here.
Okay.
Have you finished your college education by now?
You would think so, but I haven't. Reason being is I was going to school to be a physical education teacher. And with the background that I have now, I can't. However, I'm still figuring out what exactly I want to do with technology, because I'm going to confuse people. I'm sorry. But computer coding is like a big umbrella, and then there's bigger or smaller sets of umbrellas underneath it, and then it gets smaller. So by taking the jobs that I am and by creating my own projects, I'm figuring out what area I'm particularly good at. And so far it's been cybersecurity, which that would be, in this case, would mean encrypting all your, okay, now I'm speaking gibberish. That would be like if you put in your credit card information for something, it makes it so that way nobody else that's harmful can't take it and use it for something malicious. So that would be what I would be in charge of. And then if something like that happens, like if anybody's ever had their identity stolen or someone's taken stuff from their bank without their permission, that would be my area, is to shut that down and fix it for you.
Sounds like that'll be something that's open for a long, long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else? God ain't done with her yet. And some of us are privileged to be eating in a luncheon with her, but that won't be starting until 11:30. So you might be able to grab her and have a few more, even more personal conversations that maybe you didn't feel free to share here. Is that any other last question to somebody that says, "Ah, I'd like the whole group to hear this"? Anybody? Well, are we glad that Mikayla came? Thank you. And she is free to go to other places, you know, and we'd say, oh, how about coming here? I haven't done that before. Oh, yeah, I can do that. Can you see how Mikayla has done that again and again and again, and she will continue to do that? Thank you, Mikayla.
Mhm.